Another year, another hyper-violent retro indie FPS. Not that I'm complaining though, these games tickle me in all the right ways, and Forgive Me Father is another fairly strong contender in the running. Developed by Byte Barrel and published by 1C Entertainment, Forgive Me Father is a dark, Lovecraftian shooter with a unique comic book style. I was drawn to this one the moment I saw it, but 1C Entertainment were kind enough to get in contact and throw me an early key for the recently released full version of the game. It's always nice to get opportunities like that, but fear not, just because I got given the game for free, it doesn't mean I won't be honest in my overview, and luckily my honest opinion is that this game is great. Also, I know it's been a while since a proper video, and I do have many of those coming up, but to keep you sated until then, let's delve into the Lovecraftian fun that Forgive Me Father has to explore. It's worth noting that first of all, I accidentally played through the early access version first. That was kind of a good thing though, since it helped me understand a bit more about the development process, and it meant I could see how the game had changed for the final version. First of all, Forgive Me Father now has two playable protagonists, each with their own kit, the priest and the journalist. The early access release only had the priest, so when I jumped into a new game for the full release, I went with the journalist to see what had changed. And I'll tell you more about what this means as we get into it as well. So what's the story of Forgive Me Father? Well, the game begins with a cutscene, and these are new for the full release as well.
He asked for your help. He asked for your arrival. Chaotic contents of the letter. Missing people, panic, strange voices. Cousin Louis' request for help could not remain unanswered.
The driving force here is that your protagonist is searching for their cousin in a strange town, which only gets stranger the more you go through it. A lot of the story in game is told through notes and documents throughout the world, signified by a big notification that says story, which is a little bit unusual, but sure. The protagonist is voiced now as well, which wasn't the case in the early access release.
Dubious cases need firm methods.
The voice acting can be a little bit cheesy at times, but that's not out of place for a retro FPS. It's almost part of the experience, really.
No one will notice if it's gone.
But the general gist is that you're a person with a gun and there are bad things to shoot. And speaking of, let's talk weapons. This game has a fair few of them. It starts out pretty simple. You've got your basic melee and a knife, a trustworthy pistol, a double-barreled shotgun, a couple of different machine guns, a harpoon cannon, a power weapon, and energy weapons. All of these feel great to use and have specific uses for different enemies. Where they diverge, mind you, is the upgrade system. You see, over time in Forgive Me Father, you'll level up, and you'll have various points to spend to upgrade your weaponry and boost health, armor, and abilities. I say upgrade weaponry, but that might not technically be the right word. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's more of a side grade. Take the pistol for instance. You have two upgrade paths for this one, and if you take one, you can't use the other. The first time I played, I went for dual pistols, which I liked a lot, but on the second playthrough, I tried the semi-automatic pistol, which also proved to have its uses. It's hard to say which one I liked more. They're both good in different ways. And Forgive Me Father lets you shape your character to your playstyle, and the upgrades have some cool visual flair as well. You could go for a more basic shotgun upgrade, or you could do this to it. Yeah, that is nasty and I love it. There is one particular upgrade which only became useful later in the game, due to it using energy ammo which only turns up after a specific point. The problem is that this meant I had one weapon slot essentially taken out of commission for a good chunk of the game, which was unfortunate. That said, when you do finally get energy ammo, this upgrade is a hell of a lot of fun. Oh yes. You might have also heard me mention abilities, and yes, each character has 4 different abilities that are unlocked through the course of the game. For the priest, you have a cross, a mop, a Bible, and an amulet. First up, the cross. It's a healing item. When activated, it heals a little bit of health. Very simple and very useful. It's easy to forget sometimes, but it can save your skin. Now, the mop might seem a little bit out of place. I mean, it doesn't seem like an item a priest would have. But when you consider that it's soaked in holy water, you kind of begin to understand it a bit more. The mop is a stun. You can use it to stop an enemy in their tracks. with this triangle effect clearly signaling that they're out of commission for a moment. Again, very handy in some bigger fights if you need to take a powerful foe off the board for a moment. Next up is the Bible, which is a temporary invulnerability, great for catching your breath in between some more hectic moments. It turns the screen bright yellow, which can be a little bit jarring at times, but hey, it's definitely better than Doom's blinding white. Finally, the amulet, which makes your weapon not take up ammo for its duration. I didn't find this one incredibly useful, but it did help sometimes. But yeah, that's the priest kit. The journalist kit, on the other hand, is pretty different and rewards a slightly more aggressive playstyle. First of all, she has some sage. When burned, the journalist enters a berserk mode with a sword made of golden light that heals you when you kill enemies with it. It's pretty great if you're down a bit and have a bunch of fodder you can just slice down easily. I love this ability. Next is the camera, which is used to catch enemies in 4K. They can't believe they've been caught in 4K, so it stuns them. It's the same as the mob, basically. Then there's the voodoo doll, which is a bit different to the one in Blood. It does an area of effect damage, and, well, you do get surrounded quite often in this game, so it does come in handy. And finally, you have cigarettes, which slow down time. I've never smoked cigarettes before, so I actually had no idea they did this. Nobody ever told me that. All of these abilities for both characters can be upgraded as well, and they're really cool. They're not free to use whenever though, that would make things too easy. Instead, you have a limited supply, and they cost madness to use. So what's madness? Well, my friend, that's this little pinkish purple meter here. As it fills up, the world becomes grayer and fuzzier, and you fill it by committing acts of violence and drinking alcohol. I guess that checks out.
I don't have a problem. You have a problem.
But the madness is kind of like a use it or lose it thing, so the abilities are most useful in the midst of combat when you've already dished out a load of carnage. It's a really interesting system, and I really like how it changes up the encounters. Speaking of which, let's talk about the creatures you'll be meeting in the game. For example, you have the Wretches, which come in a couple of variants, naked and not naked, but don't worry, they aren't really naked, that's just the name. These guys are basically just your garden variety zombies, but the non-naked variety are carrying a spare head, so if you headshot them, they replace their head and keep on walking. I love that. It's such a silly and unique thing, but it works so well. And on top of that, you can destroy their spare head first if you want to, because this game has locational damage, and it's really cool. Enemies can be headshot for extra damage, or even have weak points that change their behavior. A little bit like some of the enemies in Doom Eternal. One such enemy is the Liquidator, who have a bottle of liquid with them that allows them to fire out a burst of projectiles. They can be pretty dangerous, but destroying the bottle melts half of their body and then they charge at you and become a melee enemy. As such, it's best to use auto-firing weapons or precise shots to get rid of the bottle quickly, especially with groups of them. You really start to think about the best way to take down different enemies at different times, and that's the kind of thing I love in a shooter. There are quite a few different projectile enemies in the game, such as the fat fish who crawl on the ground if you don't destroy their heads, the yellow cultists who teleport around and can make homing projectiles, and many more. Including the forest cultist. I hate these guys. I don't know what it is about them, but they always seem to hit me and it's very annoying. But yeah, there's such an interesting rogues gallery in this game, and it keeps getting stranger and wilder and more tentacly as you go through. Some of them are really creepy as well. Take the Patient, for example. These things would have freaked me out if I played this as a kid. They're a little bit like the witches from Left 4 Dead. You see, they sit on the floor shivering, and you can hear them from afar. The thing is, when you approach or if you shoot them, they transform into a twisted creature and charge at you with alarming speed.
You know about war safety?
What, is this guy throwing fish at me? That's a bit... The game is always throwing new challenges at the player, and just when you think you've met everything, some other strange beast is thrown into the mix. So with all that, let's talk about the save system. Once again, this is a game with no at-will quick saving. Instead, you have these specific save points dotted around the map, with a strange, drunk old man sitting by them. And I love this, because he greets you really fondly when you reach one of them. It almost feels like an old friend is greeting you, and I can think of no better way to describe a save point. It's perfect.
Thank you, sir. Very cool.
Wait, what? Anyhow, one thing that really stood out to me when I played this game was, well, the atmosphere. I feel like Forgive Me Father is at its best when giving you strange, eerie environments to explore. It's something the game does incredibly well. Between the music, art style, and level design, there are some genuinely creepy moments. I mean, yeah, they're punctuated with arenas that give you pumping action music that you might be more accustomed to in a retro FPS, but the pacing is good and I think they fit together really well. At least they do once the game gets going. I think the first few levels are fine, but it doesn't really quite feel like the devs really knew what the game was going to be until further on. Like, maybe that's just me. But it wasn't until the hospital and several levels into the second chapter with a more gothic vibe that I really started to feel the game and vibe with it. If I could criticize that, I'd say that perhaps the first couple of levels could have done with a slight overhaul. They just maybe feel a little bit out of place now, especially in comparison to later ones. It's like as the early access progressed, they understood level design better and what they wanted the game to be. Which isn't a bad thing per se, but I did notice it. I really like the larger levels as well, particularly the ones that have you moving back and forth. It's the classic retro FPS design with coloured keys, but don't get me wrong, it's a tried and tested formula that works excellently. Each level is stocked full of gorgeous detail and hidden secrets too, including some Easter eggs. You see, you might have noticed that this game is similar in style to New Blood's upcoming Fallen Aces, and the devs have pretty much acknowledged that.
Fallen Aces?
But yeah, much like, say, Blood, for example, there are plenty of references to tickle you. From The Shining to... wait a minute, that's the TARDIS. But yes, there are plenty of great levels. All of them feel unique, and they all have their own thing going on, occasionally throwing in a unique gimmick for the hell of it. For example, one level is entirely underwater, and the only available weapon is the harpoon gun. There is one early one I really like though. And while this one isn't the most interesting layout-wise, throughout the whole thing you're being quietly pursued by a dark spectre. It's a simple idea, but it's creepy and a lot of fun. You never know when it'll turn up to come for you, and it made me constantly watch my back. And then there's this huge, sprawling sewer level, which, goddamn, was just incredible. It's over twice as long as most of the other levels, and it's full of buzzsaws and other hazards. It really felt good to navigate and conquer. But yeah, once Forgive Me Father gets going, it's just a blast. It does take a moment, that's what I will note. If you're not vibing with it immediately, just keep at it. It's got some good stuff to show you later on. Another fun thing to mention is that Forgive Me Father has bosses, and they're pretty great. I won't go into much more detail than that, but they're a fun challenge. That doesn't mean the main game doesn't have its fair share of challenges though. The difficulty doesn't start out very high, but it really ramps up throughout the game, especially towards the end. And I think it's perhaps a little bit too much by Act 5. I reckon a bit of rebalancing might be in order there, and I don't think I'm alone on that. Even on normal, I found myself running dry on ammo, and being stuck fighting tough enemies that have a lot of health. I should also mention that I did run into a couple of bugs in the version that I was given, but a lot of these have been very quickly patched. In the final game, I did find some slight performance issues in the last act when using cigarettes, but only in this one level. Overall, at least, the game does feel nicely polished, and if there are issues, I'm pretty sure they'll be patched promptly. It's really great stuff, and I highly recommend giving it a go, especially if you're a fan of dark retro FPS. I think the closest games I can compare Forgive Me Father to are Doom 2016 with its action arenas and various upgrades, and Dusk for the atmosphere and environments. So if you enjoyed either of those games, or even something like Blood, I feel like you would get a kick out of this cultic shooter. I know I did. It's delightful Lovecraftian carnage. And you all know we love to gun down cultists and monstrosities in video games. So go on, try Forgive Me Father. Do you need any other proof? Check this out. Yeah.